Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. I'm so glad you're joining us today because, well, we're looking at a truly unprecedented moment in modern history. It's late August 2026, and our world is just defined by this incredibly complex web of overlapping, high-stakes global events. Honestly, if you've been glancing at the news lately, you already know it feels like absolutely everything is happening everywhere all at once. So the big question we really need to ask ourselves today is this: what actually happens when trade, security, climate, and health crises just collide, all at the exact same time? Rather than treating these like, isolated, random news stories, we're going to analyze them as four distinct pillars of global disruption. By putting these events side by side, we can actually start to make sense of the massive structural shifts reshaping our geopolitical and economic landscape right now. All right, four pillars: economy, security, environment, and health. We're going to dive right in and break these down because every single one of them is taking a massive shock right now. Let's start with pillar number one: economic disruption, specifically the incredibly tense US-Canada trade war. Okay, so what started out as a standard dispute over trading practices has literally spilled over into a fight about the actual map of North America. Get this. U.S. President Donald Trump recently signed an executive order directing the federal government to officially rename Lake Ontario to Lake America for all U.S. federal usage. I mean, objectively, the U.S. can't just force international cartographers to reprint their atlases overnight, right? But as a geopolitical maneuver, it perfectly symbolizes just how surreal and completely strained this relationship has become. And if you look past the rhetoric, the tit-for-tat economic reality is pretty brutal. The U.S. just slapped 50% tariffs on $20 billion worth of Canadian goods, and now they're threatening the Canadian auto parts industry too. Canada's response? Dollar-for-dollar retaliatory tariffs on American steel, dairy, paper, and machinery. These are two deeply, deeply intertwined economies that are now actively weaponizing trade against one another. It's a move that threatens to just totally upend North American manufacturing supply chains. Moving on to pillar number two: security checkpoint. We're heading over to the Strait of Hormuz. Now, to understand the massive economic stakes of this maritime standoff, you really just need to look at one number: 20 million. Before this whole conflict kicked off, 20 million barrels of oil flowed through this choke point every single day. Just to put that into perspective, that's roughly a fifth of the entire global oil supply, all squeezing through one narrow waterway. So how exactly did we get here? Let's quickly trace the timeline. The broader war involving the US, Israel, and Iran actually started back on February 28th. Fast forward to mid-July, and things escalated fast. Iranian sea mines were deployed, and commercial vessels were attacked. That virtually closed the strait and, predictably, spiked global oil prices. But then, just this August, US Navy SEALs, divers, and aircraft executed this massive operation to clear those mines and technically reopen the shipping lanes. But here's the thing. There's a huge, stark contrast between a strait that's technically open and the actual reality on the water. Sure, the U.S. has assisted about 1,500 commercial vessels through the strait recently, which secures the transit of around 750 million barrels of crude. But when you look at independent commercial traffic, we are down to a trickle of just 7 commodity vessels a day. Why? Because the U.S. is maintaining a strict naval blockade on Iranian ports. So the waterway is open to international traffic under U.S. protection, but make no mistake, it is heavily restricted overall. And naturally, there is a massive framing war happening around this. The U.S. frames its control as a defensive necessity, right? Defending international freedom of navigation and keeping global energy flowing. Iran, on the flip side, insists the strait falls squarely under its regional jurisdiction. They are explicitly linking the security of this crucial energy artery to their demands for ending the wars in Lebanon and Gaza. Basically, both sides are using this critical choke point as a giant lever for their broader geopolitical goals. All right, pillar number 3, environmental catastrophe, focusing on the Himalayan glacial collapse. This is just a heartbreaking situation. We're looking at a massive ice avalanche that hit 5,000 meters up the Langtang Himal range, right on the border of Nepal and Tibet. It was triggered by a glacial collapse, sending this immense torrent of mud, ice, and water tearing into the valley below. It's directly impacted upwards of 90,000 people. Nearly 600 are confirmed dead, and anywhere from 1,000 to 2,500 people, including locals, foreign tourists, and pilgrims, are still missing. And adding a really complex geopolitical layer to this tragedy, Nepal's foreign ministry actually declined foreign search and rescue assistance, even though multiple countries offered to step in. The nightmare, unfortunately, isn't over yet. Rescue operations are being severely hampered by a terrifying secondary threat, the formation of a barrier lake. If you're not familiar, a barrier lake is a super fragile body of water that forms when landslide debris totally dams up a river. And because it's monsoon season over there, the continuous rain is completely destabilizing the soil, which means this fragile natural dam of debris could literally burst at any second. And the scale of this threat is just hard to wrap your head around. This barrier lake, sitting about 10 kilometers from Gearing Port, holds a terrifying 2 million cubic meters of water. 2 million! Think of it as a 150-meter-long, 50-meter-deep ticking time bomb hanging directly over the valley. It's so dangerous that rescue workers have to periodically halt their operations just out of sheer survival instinct. Which brings us to pillar number 4, health crisis, and the DR Congo Ebola epidemic. We are currently facing a tragic, rapidly accelerating health emergency here, and there's a razor-sharp contrast between two neighboring countries. Over in Uganda, the outbreak has officially been declared over. Amazing news, right? But right next door in the DRC, the World Health Organization just elevated the risk level to very high. We are looking at the absolute deadliest Ebola outbreak in the country's history. We're talking over 5,500 cases and a staggering 46% mortality rate, which has already resulted in over 2,300 deaths. So you might be wondering, why such a massive difference in outcomes between two countries right next to each other? Well, as Doctors Without Borders has warned, the DRC outbreak isn't just a medical failure, it's a deep structural one. The containment efforts are being actively derailed by armed conflict in the region. That violence causes mass displacement, which then leads to severe, widespread food insecurity. It's a vicious cycle. You simply cannot fight a highly infectious disease when the population is constantly on the move, fleeing violence. There is, however, a glimmer of scientific hope on the horizon. CPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, is aggressively fast-tracking 3 brand-new vaccine candidates. These are specifically targeted at the exact strain of the Ebola virus causing this current outbreak. So science is absolutely racing to catch up with the crisis. Finally, let's look at Section 5, the global ripple effect. So we've walked through the economy, security, the environment, and global health. And I think this brilliantly illustrates exactly why we can't look at the news in a vacuum anymore. Think about it. A trade war in North America is straining the exact same fragile global supply chains that are being bottlenecked by naval blockades in the Middle East. That makes energy markets incredibly volatile, driving up costs everywhere. Meanwhile, climate disasters in the Himalayas and deadly epidemics in Africa are totally overextending our international aid resources. And through all of this, geopolitical gridlock makes it nearly impossible for nations to actually cooperate on solutions. It is all connected. Which leaves us with this final critical question. Are our global systems actually resilient enough to survive when every single pillar of stability, our trade, our security, our climate, and our health, is violently shaken at the exact same time? It's a massive, massive question. But understanding the complex web effects we cover today, well, that's the first step toward finding an answer. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions, and I will see you next time as we continue to decode our world.